Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Hope you guys can hear. Hope you guys are able to view this. Okay, so again, sorry about the previous one. If you guys can let me know if the sound is working. Right, so we don't have a repeat. Okay, so I think it's working. I should be working. All right. So the surah basically that we're going to be looking at, or just some reflections of the surah, is called Surah Ankaboot. Now, one of the things I'm trying to do is basically get a a form of maybe a series going, or where we can actually go through a surah together, and your reflections can also be given as well. Yeah, so you guys can use a translation. I think one of the best translations that you guys can use is possibly Gracious Quran. It's a good translation. Yeah. And there's many others out there as well, but Gracious Quran I think is a good one. So this surah itself, Surah Ankaboot, is called the Surah Ankaboot. Ankaboot means spider, basically, right? So although it's called spider, it doesn't really have anything to do with a spider itself. Yeah, so it's not necessarily like there's not like a spider kind of breakdown of a spider. The only reason a spider is mentioned is because a similitude is given to the way that the people who have partners with Allah, who associate partners with Allah, do shirk, their system of the way their belief system works is very similar to, or is like a spider's web, how a spider sets up a web. So we're going to be looking at that, inshallah. So you guys previously were just watching me move my lips, my mouth, and you couldn't hear a word. I didn't even realize. It was only when I looked at your comments that I realized that you guys were unable to hear. But chalo, these things happen. So anyway, just some kind of main sort of themes of this surah. So the main sort of themes of this surah you can see is, for example, like the surah, it's about the hardships and difficulties that you're going to face being a Muslim, right? This is one of the main sort of like overarching themes, that just believing in Allah, just having faith, having iman, it's not going to be an easy road. It's going to be a difficult road. In fact, it's going to be a very difficult road, right? And this is one of the things which is basically like a byproduct, you can say, of being a Muslim as well. That wherever you are in life, whichever country you're in, whatever age, whatever situation you're in, you are always going to be put into dilemmas. You're going to put into hardship. So I think it's a very important surah for us, especially nowadays, for many people living around the world. The tests that Muslims are put through, so we can have an understanding of what we're supposed to be expecting. So the surah, it contains the mention of 7 prophets. So the 7 prophets that are mentioned in this Quran, in this surah: Nuh alayhi salam, Nuh, number 1. Number 2, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Lut alayhi salam, Shu'aib alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, Ishaq alayhi salam, and Yaqub alayhi salam. Right. So these are 7 prophets, and I think I mentioned all of them. I don't think I missed anyone out. So these are the 7 prophets that I mentioned. Now, personally, I believe, from my little research that I've done in the Quran, is that every surah has to be unique. So the stories mentioned in the surah, the prophets that are mentioned, the themes that are mentioned, the way everything is linked together, the order, sequencing, has to all be specific to that surah. So this is why when I read a surah, what I try and do is I try to understand from the beginning, the first verse to the last verse. I try to find the entire connection of this surah. It all sort of links together, right? And if you were to take one of the links out and you would try and put it into a different surah, it would mess up the entire surah. The entire surah would actually break apart. So these are the 7 prophets. There's also some evil people that are mentioned in the surah. Qarun is mentioned, Fir'aun is mentioned, Haman is mentioned, right? So these 3 are mentioned in the surah: Qarun, Fir'aun, Haman. And interestingly, these 3 figures were figures that were in the time of Musa alayhi salam. So the time of Musa alayhi salam, from amongst the people that gave him problems. The big figures were Fir'aun, obviously, and then Haman, who was like his right hand man, who would advisor, and then Qarun, who was actually Bani Israel, but he had joined the ranks of the people of Pharaoh, and he was a very rich person. So, influences, yeah. So, in other words, people finding hardships, people finding difficulties because of influences, yeah. So, I mean, like nowadays we have a lot of influencers around the world who are in positions, and because of things they say, because of decisions they make, life can become very difficult for Muslims, right? And we just see it nowadays a lot on media, YouTube, and other sorts of outlets. You see people who are in position, and because they're not careful of what they say, or because of the wrong decisions that they've made, um, we see that because what they've said, life's becoming very difficult for certain Muslims, or maybe everyone, or maybe certain individuals around the world, groups of Muslims, right? So this surah, I think, is a very important thing reflections that I've got from this. So the evils in this surah, I've kind of remember I haven't really kind of exhausted everything in the surah. That's something which I'll never be able to do. The point of me delivering this, or even maybe going through this, and I might do a series of this. I might do one tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, maybe like that, Thursday. I'll see. I'll try to see if I can do it, just on this surah, so that I can benefit more from this surah. So when I'm speaking to you, what tends to happen is I get more ideas, I get more sort of like personal sort of reflections, post reflections, and then I can go back and then I can see more. So it opens up the surah more, if you know what I mean. All right, so I've made some, like, I've collected about 8, right? 8 various hardships that this surah presents, right? So number 1, parents, the hardships that parents can bring. So from a very young age, people will face hardships because of their parents. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll face a lot. So this is something very important. So the surah talks in the beginning about parents, the hardships that parents will bring. Reverts will understand this a lot. Those especially whose parents are against them accepting Islam, and the Quran talks about that as well. And even Muslims as well. Many Muslim parents who put Muslim children, their own children, into difficulties and kind of want them to compromise their religious values. So that's the first thing. Number 2, yeah, is the hardships that people will face when it comes to other oppressors. Yeah, so in other words, oppressors, there's going to be people out there who are going to oppress, and the Quran and the surah discusses them, like we said, Fir'aun, Qarun, Haman, some of them, and there's also others as well. Nuh alayhi salam, he faced 950 years. So imagine that. Yeah, 950 years of oppression, difficulty from his people, and Allah delivered in the entire surah, in the entire Quran actually. This is the only place where Allah mentions how long Nuh alayhi salam was on earth, yeah, giving da'wah. 950 years. And so this 950 years, is it referring to 950 like Gregorian years as we understand it, solar years? Is it referring to some other form of calendar? We don't really know, but a very long time he was there. And Allah is showing in this surah, because this surah, our overarching theme is hardships, we're going to see a lot of like content of the stories of the prophets to do with hardships, right? Difficulties. So that's one of the things that we see in this surah. That's the third. Third is hardships, facing hardships because of not complaining about the trials that we go through. So in other words, the surah also talks about that we should expect this. As a Muslim, we should be mentally prepared for difficulties. Like, we shouldn't think that we're going to be living in this country, let's say for example the UK. We should never think that I'm going to be living in the UK and I will never ever have to face any difficulty. No, you will face it. You're going to face difficulties. If you've been living for 10 years and 15 years and you haven't really felt anything because of being a Muslim, then it's going to happen soon. If you've been in education in this country and you've never had to face anything because of you being a Muslim, you could get ready for it. Same with being a parent, a father, a mother, a husband, a wife, a child. whatever, you're going to face this, because this is naturally what is going to come next. So that's the third thing, the hardships that people will have to face because of the trials. Number 4 is speaking the truth. So the prophets that came, and Allah clearly mentions about certain prophets who spoke the truth. Who were the people that spoke the truth? So Ibrahim alayhi salam is one of them. So you got Ibrahim alayhi salam. He speaks, and his conversation is like the longest conversation of this entire surah of the prophets is Ibrahim alayhi salam. Right? So Ibrahim alayhi salam, the longest discussion he has, and there's so many like lessons that we can learn from his statements. The kind of, we can draw a picture, in fact, by just going through the statements of Ibrahim alayhi salam in this surah, of what Ibrahim alayhi salam was going through and how we can see that in our lives today. Right? So I think a good study of Ibrahim alayhi salam is needed. The second is Lut alayhi salam. Lut alayhi salam was also someone whose statements are mentioned. He spoke the truth, and because of him speaking the truth, he got backlash. You got Shu'aib alayhi salam. He spoke the truth. Because of what he said, he got backlash. So these are the 3 main prophets whose statements are actually mentioned. Right? So in other words, sometimes you are going to have to face hardships because of this truth you speak. If you stay silent, a lot of the hardships in your life, you're not going to face them. But you speak the truth, and you have to speak the truth sometimes. You're going to be, bombarded with hardships and difficulties in your life. You might have to lose your home. You might have to lose your job. You might have to lose your family. You might have to lose so many things because of this. The fifth the surah mentions is the shirk in society. So the shirk in the society itself is a very, very you can say motivator or influencer of hardships. Hardships, they come in various forms. One of them is a society that associates with Allah. Any society that associates with Allah is automatically has put itself on a path of destruction. This is always the case. Every path other than the path that Allah is pleased with is always a path of destruction. We all know that. But shirk is a very, very dangerous path. There is no room for shirk on earth. If someone says, well, let this country continue doing their shirk, they're not going to harm anyone. No, they will harm someone. And we can just see this today. If you look in the world today, the societies that do shirk, for example, like the Hindu society, India, the Buddhists, these are the 2 major ones that we can see. I can't think of any other ones besides this. But you look at them, a lot of people, assume that their faith was a very peaceful faith. They just did their own thing. And it's just all of a sudden now what's happened is they've become, there's a group of them, not all of them, but there's a group of them who have become very violent, and they are the most predominant ones now in the media. The very violent ones, the ones that are causing, because of their beliefs, they assume their belief, and what they're doing to innocent people. So, shirk is a very evil thing, and shirk is something which the Quran denounces all the time. We all know that. So this is the 5th thing. Yeah, the 5th. The 6th is social evils. So social evils in a society. And Allah gives the example of Lut alayhi salam. So Lut alayhi salam, he gives the example of Lut alayhi salam and the people, what they were doing in their times, which was their problem was not the problem of kufr. They weren't necessarily, claiming someone else to be God, anything like that. They were actually doing acts which were the most obscene, horrendous acts that were unprecedented. No one had done those before. And these were actually leading to the destruction of their society. And this was bringing hardships upon Lut alayhi salam and also other people. So social evils as well, the Quran mentions. Number 6 is evil rulers, evil leaders. So evil leaders are something which can cause havoc to a society. If you have leaders who are bent on, oppressing the public, whatever, then it's always important to remember that evil leaders have been the reason for a lot of problems on earth. And you can see this now around the world, right? The government, if the government is headed by people who are corrupt, people who are, have ulterior motives, who are motivated by desire and whatever, then these people cause a lot of problems in society. And last is evil influences, right? So you have evil influences. So evil influencers, like we said before, people who are not necessarily the leaders, but they have very powerful, and what's their power? Wealth is their power. So in other words, if you see people, if there are people out there who are very, very wealthy and they are evil people, they will influence other people, right? So you have, for example, like nowadays lots of governments are funded privately by organizations and governments and lobbying groups, and they can sway the government towards whatever they want, right? So if there's a big organization, a company, and that company doesn't want the government to put some sort of restrictions on them, you simply fund the government, you give them what you want to get, whatever money they want, whatever funds they want, support they want, and you can sway their position. So these are some of the things, the hardships that I've kind of seen, and there's others which maybe you guys can look at as well next time. Still going through this surah, maybe you guys can get some good points on this as well. And there's lots more to talk about, but I don't really have time. Okay, some of the things that this surah. Let's just go back to this issue of the spider's web. Why is the spider's web mentioned? Now, the spider building its web is in verse 41 of this chapter. So Allah says in verse 41, example of those who set up from besides Allah helpers, like people to help them, is like the example of a spider who builds a web, and indeed the weakest of homes is the home of the spider, if only they knew. Okay, so this is the interesting, like, why give this example for? Like, there's so many examples the Quran gives. Why this example right here? Nowhere else in the Quran does Allah give an example of the problems of a shirk system like a spider's web. So I was thinking about this, and some things came to my mind. So one of the things is that if you look at a spider's web, what is a spider's web ultimately for? Is it for living on? So it's not for living. In other words, the spider's web is not one of those homes that people build to live there, right? So in a normal homes, a bait is a place where you spend the night, where you kind of like, you do your work somewhere else, and then at night time you come back and you spend the night there. This is called a bait. So their home, although it's called a spider, in English we call it a spider's web, right? But in Arabic you call it Bait al-ankaboot. Yeah, Bait al-ankaboot. It's a spider's web. Is basically a kind of nicely woven, right, net that's attached to something that's solid. So you have in your house maybe, a spider's web in the corner of the room, and you'll always find this. It's very common. The spider's web is always built in a place like corners or sides that the spider can attach its web to. So in other words, shirk is always based upon something originally that was true. Shirk will always be based upon something that was true. But then the way that the spider's web is designed, it goes against the structure of the things that it's attached to. Right? It totally refigures, or it disfigures the structure, and it actually makes it weak. Right? So that's the first thing. That the shirk system is always going to be based upon something that was true at one point. Like the people doing shirk in Mecca, their system is based upon Ibrahim alayhi salam's legacy. But they've attached their beliefs, they've like taken their beliefs and connecting dot to dot, they've made their own dots, and they've started to go outside of Ibrahim alayhi salam's system. They've left that and they've started to connect it to other places. So this is the first thing. And secondly is because the spider's web is a very, very weak web. In other words, another spider can come and start, building its own web and start restructuring the spider's web into a different structure. So therefore, shirk is never ever going to be consistent. Shirk will always be evolving. It's always changing. There's no kind of solidness to it. Number 3 is that shirk is always very weak. Awhan al-buyut. So the house itself, the spider's web, the spider's house, it's a very weak thing. It's probably the most weakest thing in that part of the house, in your house, where you have a spider's web. That's the most weakest part. The thing that it's attached to is very strong. So the original belief system that the shirk is based on is a very solid, but then the spider's web is the weakest thing that you can ever have there. Okay, so this was another thing. A fourth thing that came to my mind, right? So these I'm just like I'm not haven't really kind of written this down, but this is just some of the things that were coming to my mind. Uh, so the fourth thing is Allah is showing that look, it's very easy to identify why shirk is wrongful. It's very easy to identify. Yeah, and the reason you can identify is because you compare it with Allah's system. Allah's system is a very solid system, a system that's based upon solid principles and they don't change. Oneness in Allah will never ever change. Anything besides that will always be changing. So identifying, just like if you go into a room and you see a spider's web, you can clearly tell that the spider's web is not normal there. It's not natural to have a spider's web in the corner of your room, right? It's something which is being put there later on. So you can easily identify it. So كمثل العنكبوت اتخذت بيتا وإن أوهن البيوت لبيت العنكبوت. So the weakest of systems, the shirk, is the most weakest system that the people have. They have no dalil for it. They have no like basis for it. Nothing at all. And therefore you can't argue with them. So Allah later on, then about three lines later, Allah talks about the Ahl Kitab. The Ahl Kitab are not considered to be people of shirk. Their system is a much more solid system than the people of shirk. Yeah, so this is why when Allah talks about the Ahl Kitab, He does not say about the Ahl Kitab like He says about the people of shirk. In fact, with the Ahl Kitab, He says that discuss with them, like debate with them, but debate in the most, with the best arguments, the strongest arguments. He doesn't say that about the people of shirk. He doesn't say debate with them because there's no basis to debate upon. Like you only debate with someone who at least has some sort of qualifies to be debated with. These people don't qualify. Yeah, then they are not qualified to debate. So therefore, it's no point debating with these people because they, from day one, these people are upon falsehood. So anyway, I'll stop there. So I thought I'd just share with you guys some of these, and I'm going to share with you guys more things that I've learned from this surah as well. This is just a little, tip of the iceberg, inshallah. The point is, like I said, it's not more to benefit you guys than it is to benefit me. So you guys will benefit, inshallah, but I'll benefit more because what will happen is you guys will ask questions, and next time you guys will read upon this surah, and you guys will present your own reflections as well, and I will also look at this as well, and then I'll read again. So I've read this surah probably, maybe about 10-15 times now in the past few days, back and forth, just reading it. So again, idea in my mind, and I try to see if that idea is consistent, yeah, and how that works. And then it kind of, so for example, like the beginning of the surah, it starts off with this powerful question, which is, do people think that they'll be left just by believing, just by saying we believe, and they're never going to be put into trial and test? Yeah. And then at the end of the surah, Allah says, indeed those who strive in my way, in the way of Allah, in my way, we're going to guide them, we're going to show them the path. Right? So you have this kind of like this theme, overarching theme, like we said, which is the importance of a Muslim having to realize, you must realize that your life is going to be filled with hardships and you have to struggle. You don't just sit back and you don't just ride the waves. You've got to go against the waves sometimes, and not all sometimes, all the time. You're going to have to go against the current because your values are values which are true values, and everyone else is going to try to go against you for whatever reason. Yeah, so anyway, any questions? Any you guys questions? Because I'm going to have to go and ask me Maghrib time soon. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Similar to certain leaders nowadays, inshallah. Series of brilliant, jazakallah khair. Let us know in advance, we can all discuss from a better point. Yeah, inshallah. So next time, read surah. I'm going to try to do one tomorrow, hopefully. So read surah Ankaboot, inshallah. 100%, subhanallah. Do you think Allah is showing us signs with what is happening in Jammu Kashmir? I don't know if you have family who live in Azad Kashmir, particular areas around there have darbars, people worshipping graves. Don't know. I mean, what I personally think is when we look at a surah, we shouldn't look at what's happening in the world and reflect it onto the surah. What we should try and do is understand the surah, and then we try to see any similarities of this. So this surah will be talking about like shirk, which is obviously the most explicit shirk. So not like shirk which is sort of like debated. Yeah, like some people will say things like praying to graves or something like that. We're talking about people who explicitly say that we're mushrikeen, because in that case Christians are doing shirk as well. But the Quran doesn't call them mushriks, calls them monotheists in that state. Its home is weak. Ivory towers of power are weak. Yeah, definitely very weak. Home is very weak. Jazakallah khair. If you get caught in a web, it's a struggle. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the web is a struggle as well. For who though? Yeah, for the person who can't see it's weak. So for the insect, like for the ant or for the fly who gets trapped in the web, he can't see it's weak. For him, it's strong. Yeah, he gets caught up in there. And sometimes it happens to us, like, the system that's been set up that we live in. Sometimes we get trapped in there. We can't see that it's a weak system. We can't debate people within the system. We have to we have to zoom out, and we have to talk about the principles of the system. Like, for example, the constitution and the laws that are established in the West, for example, are based upon philosophies. If we argue and we try to adjust our own religion to kind of fit in with this system, what's going to happen is we're weakening our own system. And we have to kind of look at the greater philosophies that are overarching, and we have to debate them. We have to see that, okay, what these laws are based upon. Like, for example, the philosophy that as long as you're not harming someone, then you're okay, you're good in this society. We don't believe in that as Muslims. As long as you're not harming anyone, no, we don't believe in that, because we believe that is also something which is destructive, a destructive concept and belief. So laws that are based upon this are going to be destructive for the community and society. Yeah, so those are some of the things. And inshallah, next time, like we said, we're going to discuss some more things on this surah as well. So hopefully tomorrow, inshallah, maybe roughly, probably the same time, maybe it might be a bit later, after Maghrib maybe. So stay tuned, guys, inshallah, and read up on this surah and try to make notes, try to make some notes of what you get from this surah. What I want you guys to focus on is, what is this surah telling you? Yeah, I don't want you to kind of like apply this surah to the outside world. No, don't do that yet. Just look at what this surah is saying, some common sort of expressions that are used in the surah. What things are not found in this surah that you find in other surahs? Like, for example, the shaitan is not mentioned in this surah, which shaitan is mentioned in other surahs. So there's something important for that as well. And certain statements of Ibrahim alayhi salam in this surah are only mentioned here, and they're not mentioned anywhere else. Yeah, so those are the kind of things that we want to look at. Okay, any other question, guys? So inshallah, like I said, try to give your reflection. I don't mind if they're wrong. It doesn't really matter if they're wrong. Yeah, because we're all learning. The aim is to kind of encourage people to read the surah as well. To read the surah, read the translation. And like I said, the Gracious Quran is a very good one to read. Yeah, so Gracious Quran, very nice, very good. If you have your own preference of a translation on the Quran, go for it, don't mind. I'm going to be reading the Arabic one. If you guys know Arabic, try to read the Arabic one as well. I mean, Arabic is obviously much better. Okay, alright, so anyway, guys, take care, and I will inshallah probably see you guys tomorrow. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.